grow your character. And when you grow your character, then you'll see that your communication starts to grow with it. And when you can communicate well, then what you'll see, you can be a better companion, because now I understand you. And when we understand each other and you're a better companion, life is better.
Welcome to another episode of The Financially Free Investor, where you will learn information and strategies on how to become financially independent by investing in real estate, something that is not taught openly in our society today. Financial freedom matters so you can live a bigger life, retire early, and do what matters most to you. Get ready to hear tried and true methods to becoming financially free with your host, Jordy Clark.
Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of the Financially Free Investor Podcast. So, this is an awesome episode. It's going to be a little bit longer than most, but I promise you, this is going to be one that you'll probably listen to a couple of times. You might even send it to a friend, a family member, a loved one. Dr. Matt Townsend has been an absolute blessing in my life and my relationship with Courtney. I may have said this earlier, but there was a time where we almost got divorced. Our marriage wasn't great. It is certainly better now. And we went through marriage counseling and a lot of different things. And Dr. Matt Townsend really helped us out, really helped us learn how to communicate, really helped us figure out how to diffuse situations, how to stop fighting. We certainly still have friction in our life. However, we at least have the tools that he gave us. And so I wanted to bring him to the podcast. He shared so much gold, so much wisdom. He's just a world-renowned relationship coach. And he's frankly saved a lot of marriages and improved a lot of lives. And I wanted to bring a little bit of that to you. So with that being said, let's bring him in.
Welcome to another episode of The Financially Free Investor, where you will learn information and strategies on how to become financially independent by investing in real estate, something that is not taught openly in our society today. Financial freedom matters so you can live a bigger life, retire early, and do what matters most to you. Get ready to hear tried and true methods to becoming financially free with your host, Jordy Clark.
All right. Dr. Matt Townsend, welcome into the episode. How are you doing?
Good. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Jordy. This is fun.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I recorded a little intro to the podcast before that kind of tells how we met a little bit, but You drastically changed the trajectory of Courtney and not only our life, but our marriage.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. You actually changed it. I just was sitting there.
Yeah. Well,
right. Yeah. I didn't have to go home and do the homework with you.
That's true. That's true. How about you gave us the tools that allowed us the opportunity to change.
Yeah.
And we're still working on it.
Good. Yeah. That's good. We all are. That's kind of how it works, right?
Yeah.
We've all got to figure it out.
So, maybe jump in and kind of tell us who you are, your story, how you got into starved stuff. Yeah. And we'll go from there.
So I have a really kind of weird background and approach to all of this. So I grew up in Salt Lake City with parents that divorced when I was 8 years old. So at 8, I would just awesome people, just didn't know how to get along. And I'd hear them arguing, and it wasn't horrible and oppressive and bad. It was just they couldn't figure their stuff out. And so I, as a kid, I would listen, and I could never figure out, how can two people that I love and like so much, how could they not get together and figure this stuff out? And later I found out, very few people really know how to have conflict and handle it very well. So that has always kind of influenced my life. I grew up a kid that I'd hang out at my friends' houses, and I'd always watch their parents. I kind of knew which couples in the neighborhood were really healthy, which seemed to do better, which were stronger. I knew certain ones that I wanted to kind of model my future marriage off of, but I was always curious. I was just the Townsend kid that was kind of the creepy one that watches relationships. And I loved it. And so when I went to college, I didn't know what degree to go get. Like, what's the degree to help people learn to talk? And that degree I found out didn't exist. So some people said, go be a marriage counselor. And so I went into some psychology and I learned a lot about Freud. And then I thought, man, that guy's messed up. And I don't want anything to do with that. And then somebody told me, well, lawyers help people mediate and talk. So I was going to go pre-law. And then I had a lot of people try to talk me out of law just because it's crazy and weird and a lot of conflict. And so I didn't know what to do. So I got a bachelor's degree in communications and started working actually towards being a journalist, worked at a television station in Salt Lake City. And I then went to go get a master's degree in journalism. And while I was getting my master's degree, I really decided I don't want to be a journalist. I like communicating really well, and I like knowing how to do media, but I really wanted to help conflict. So it just so happens that at my university, there was a professor there who basically taught me what's called dialogue theory. And dialogue theory is the theory that you use for conflict resolution. So if you've ever heard of books like Difficult Conversations or Crucial Conversations, those books are all founded in the Project on Negotiation program, which is at Harvard, which is Harvard's mediation and negotiation program. So I went and got a master's degree in conflict resolution, which was pretty cool, and had that in my back pocket. And then meanwhile, I was working for a company that a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, have heard of, called Franklin Covey Company. And I used to travel around the country for them, working with executives all over the country, from literally from the chief naval officer, so the number one guy in charge of the Navy, to all the big corporate headquarters. I've been in a lot of the Fortune 100 companies. And what I would do is I'd go around and teach the 7 habits of highly effective people. So while I was doing that, I was also helping the company and Stephen Covey and those guys write books. So I got really good at content development and creation. And on the side, I started mediating divorces because I thought that would be fun. What's more fun, Jordy, than helping a couple people that hate each other's guts? And so I started to mediate. And then I got this feeling that I just need to leave Franklin Covey and go full-time and mediate. And so about 7 years at Franklin Covey, after that, I just left, quit probably the greatest gig as a speaker you can have with the greatest company. And I left and just started my own thing. That was about 25 years ago. And I started mediating full-time and would help couples as they're divorcing. And then I found something out really cool because I had all of this content I was writing for Franklin Covey, which was going to be a book about the public victory of Stephen Covey has a theory of private victory precedes public victory. And they already had a book called First Things First that was for the private victory, but they didn't have a book for public victory, which was going to be this book that I was putting together. And I went and launched it and released it, and it's called Starved Stuff. And so I started helping couples as I would divorce them. I had all these rules they had to live. And once they were living the rules, then I would give them a discount on the divorce because I could mediate with them. So it made everything easier. I only did that about 1.5 years. And after 1.5 years, I started to notice they all have virtually the same problems over and over and over. They just have all the same issues and the same patterns. And then I went and got another master's in human development. And then I got a PhD in human systems. And I just quit mediating altogether. And all I did was start coaching couples on how to resolve conflict. And I've done that for 25 years. In the meantime, I published a book, and then I created a workshop that I validated through my PhD program. And that's all I've been doing now. And then I have a company that's called Townsend Relationship Center, where we have all the skills and tools and workshops and classes, everything from emotionally intelligent leadership to communication, real communication, to feeding the starved marriage, to anxiety and high sensitivity and all these different things that tend to impact relationships. And so that's kind of where it came from. And the starved is a really cool thing that happened, because I would sit with couples and every one of them would bring in their issue and just throw out an issue. Like I had couples, Jordy, that were divorcing over lettuce. So I'm like, why are you guys here? And they're like, well, we're done. And why are you guys done? And they're like, lettuce, basically. And they would have a fight over something as insignificant as food, and it would blow up into a really ugly fight, and they never could handle the fight and never knew what to do with it. And so as I'd watch their patterns, what I realized is everybody would fight about what I call the smoke. The smoke is everything that we fight about that's not the real issue. It's the money, the sex, the kids. So anybody out there listening, if think about the fights you have in your relationships, you'll notice they tend to appear and then they might morph. Like I always tell this story about a guy who had his wife bought a $400 purse, and it made him so mad. He was so mad because he's like, nobody needs a $400 purse. This is ridiculous. And then she said, by the way, this is the smoke. She said, it's not a purse, it's a bag. So now we're fighting about if it's a purse or a bag. And he's like, I don't care what you call it. Nobody needs a $400 bag. And she's like, oh, really? How much was your golf bag? And then right then, like the guy went deaf and he couldn't hear. And he's like, what are you talking about? Why are we talking about my golf bag? We were talking about your purse. Well, but you just said nobody needs a $400 bag. So how much was your golf bag? And he's like, the bag? And she's like, yeah, the bag. And the bag you put your bag in when we travel, and the wheels, all that. How much was all of that? And he's like, I don't know, 370. And then her eyes roll back and her head spins around and fire shoots out her eyes. And she says, 370 is 400, you dork. No, it's not. It's 370. So now notice what we're fighting about. Now we're fighting about how you round numbers, right? And then she got really sad and she said, you always did love golf more than me. And now we're fighting about golf. So everybody I would work with, their fights would just go into this amorphous smoke, and nothing would ever get solved, and it would get more and more hazy and more confusing. So right then I realized wherever there's smoke, there's got to be a fire. And the fire is the real meat of every fight or issue or just conflict. There's always the fire, and the fire is what I call the starved stuff. And I found that there's 7 basic needs that need to be met in every relationship, in every human relationship. These needs have to be met. And if they're not met, it changes how you relate, right? So I call these the starved stuff, the starved needs. And it's an acronym that spells starved. You have to have safety, so you're not going to be harmed. So you need to know you're physically safe, you're not going to be hurt, socially safe, so you won't be embarrassed, emotionally safe, so you can share what's in your heart, financially safe, so we have enough money, spiritually safe, so we have the same value system. So in your marriage, when you're fighting about money, money's just the smoke, but the issue's probably safety. When we're fighting about what's on your phone, let me see your phone. No, you don't need to see my phone. Now we're arguing if you should have access to my phone. That's the smoke, but I'm going to bet there might be a safety issue there. And what I find is until you resolve the safety issue, you're not going to resolve anything. Second need is trust. You got to trust each other. Everybody needs to feel trust. And to me, I got to trust 2 things in you. So Jordy, if you're my agent, I've got to trust you as my agent, but I've got to trust that you have the character to do what you say you're going to do, and you're competent and you know how to do it. So if you're not a competent agent, then I just am going with you because I trust you. I trust your character. But if you don't have the competency, eventually I'll probably fire you. And so if I can't get character and competence out of you, then I've got to get someone else's help. We call that a second opinion, right? So if you want a long-term relationship, we got to trust each other in each other's character and their competency. The next need is appreciation. Everybody wants to be appreciated. You got to feel like your partner appreciates you. Everyone wants to be appreciated differently. That's kind of the 5 love languages. R stands for respect. Everybody needs to feel that they're respected and revered. V stands for validation. We need to learn to have conversations where even if I don't agree with you, I can understand where you're coming from. That's how you grew up. That's what you learned. I can validate it. I don't have to agree with everything you say, but everything you say from your opinion can be valid. and I can be curious and try to understand where you're coming from. E stands for encouragement, which is where I'm your cheerleader. Everybody needs a partner that's a cheerleader, that's leading them on to strength. And the last one is dedication. Everybody needs to know that their partner's more dedicated to them than any other person, place, or thing. So I found when those needs are met, life's great, and what the smoke tends to go away. But when those needs aren't met, it creates starved stuff, right? And when the rules basically starved people starve people. And once the starved fire keeps burning, if we don't get down to the fire and start putting those needs and fixing those needs, we just keep creating more and more smoke. And generally, smoke is the number one killer of people in a house fire. The fires very rarely get to the people. The smoke gets to them long before. And I've found the same thing is true in our marriages. Most of our marriages die by smoke inhalation, just getting into the stupid stuff. And we never really ever fix the starved issues. And then we'll divorce. And then we divorce, but we take our starved stuff and our bad habits to the next relationship. And we just keep spreading starvation, and we're all starving to death, Jordy. So that's how I came about Starved. And it was really weird because it just started by watching people. And if you watch enough people handle the same kind of conflict of a divorce, you very quickly see you see the patterns that they're all living and not living.
Yeah, man, that's so good. So, I mean, one question I have is when you're in the fight, and you're fighting about the lettuce or, whatever it is. And, this is something that I, to this day, still struggle with. Like, how can somebody take a step back? Because emotionally, like, I don't know about other people, but when we start getting into a fight, like, I'm in it.
Yeah.
And then when I'm in it, right?
You're in it to win it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and, or at least like to prove my point because I want to be heard. And I think that's probably pretty common. But how does someone take a step back and go, okay, here's the 7 starved issues. And I love your explanation of that and how simple you made it. But for me in the moment, I'm like, well, crap, what is it? Is it this? Is it safety? Is it, trust? Is it like, how do you boil down and try to figure out what that issue is?
Yeah. It's a great question but what's interesting about it is, it all depends on what your goal is. So one of the first things I'll always ask people when they start to fight, it's really a cool job I've got, because once they start arguing, no one's hearing each other anymore, and they're just kind of one-upping each other in the fight. And really what's happened is what we call emotional flooding has taken place, which is where the chemistries of fight or flight have been turned on. And now we're actually fighting for survival in a conversation that's emotional and relational. So do you remember, George, our fight or flight was never really evolved. It never evolved to make sure that you'd have a good marriage. It evolved to make sure you weren't eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And so the dilemma we now face is we've kind of outlived a really incredibly threatening world. Like, it sounds weird, and a lot of listeners may not believe this, but our world we live in right now has actually never been safer. It's never been wealthier. It's never been more educated. It's never been more informed. It's never been more weirdly equal, meaning there are billions of people with money that never have had money before. Not a lot. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever talked about this on your show. The average, according to global statistics, if you make $35,000 a year in the United States, globally, $35,000 globally puts you in the 1%. Because, India, they don't make money. There's not a lot of money there. There's not a lot of money in China. There's not a lot of money. So if you're making 35 grand, which is, I don't know what the average income in the United States is anymore. What do you think it is?
50, 60,000 bucks.
Yeah. So if you're making 50 grand, which is the average income, you're killing it globally. And so we are fairly safe. So, but here's our problem. Now what happens is our fight or flight turns on just when I feel attacked emotionally by my spouse. So now I'm going to fight you like I'm a ninja trying to save my family. And so once fight or flight turns on, you're generally either going to become what we call a pursuer, which is an aggressive communicator, or you're going to become the withdrawer, which is going to run from this conversation. And statistically, 70% of the time, women are the ones that pursue. They're the ones that are going to pursue the talk. And 70% of the time, men are the ones that are generally going to withdraw from the conversation. And part of it's because there's no fair fight. Like 2,000 years ago, if the man didn't like what you were saying, they would just hit you. But they can't do that. Now we got to communicate and learn to communicate. And like you're saying, we got to learn to turn off our fight or flight emotion. So if your goal is to debate, if your goal is to win, so in the middle of when somebody starts to get flooded, what I'll do is I just ask them, I just have them stop for a second. And I have them notice what's happening. And I have them tell me, what do you guys see happening? Well, we're getting angry. Yeah, you're getting angry. And what are you feeling inside? Well, I feel disrespected. So one of the fastest ways to get to the starve stuff would be to recognize what you're feeling. And the minute you feel hurt and put down, then you can start to see, okay, that kind of revolves around respect. And you might start to notice that you have a habitual pattern of feeling disrespected. And when you feel disrespected, you may have learned really young to have your fight or flight turn on. And what you do is you bully, or what you do is you escalate the conversation, speed it up. Or what you do is you throw dirt up in the air and then you disappear. Everyone has learned different patterns for when they're not safe, when they don't feel trusted or appreciated or respected. So we try to slow the conversation down. Then we try to make overt what's happening by talking about it. You know, a really cool way, Jordy, to get rid of every one of your fights. The minute you're fighting or arguing with something about Courtney, which never happens, come on, you guys are amazing, is you immediately turn on your live stream and set your live stream up and let everybody on your channels watch Jordy and Courtney talk through their biggest conflict. And I'm going to bet that changes the game. Right? And so if that happens, if that one weird idea can change the game, then what that tells you is that humans are smart enough to turn down the fight or flight. And whatever you would do in front of 500 people to get through the conflict is probably healthier, right? Because you're probably you don't want to lose your clients. So whatever that is, and so think about that. What would you do, Jordan, if you were really getting hijacked chemically, but you had 500 people watching? What would you do to not get taken over emotionally?
Man, that's a good question. It's easy for me to say in the moment right now, but when you have the flood of chemicals, it's really tough to kind of take a step back and
except unless you look in the monitor and there's 500 people.
True.
So what's weird about it is if there were 500 people, you would seriously control your emotion way more. Just like everybody out there that has a boss, they generally don't blow up at the boss.
Sure.
And so there is a really funny point that I hear a lot with my clients. They're always saying to me, well, this never happens to me with anybody but this person, right? It only happens with this one. It doesn't happen with my boss or my friends. Right. Okay. That makes sense. But this is the only one you're sleeping with. And this is the only one that you're having children with. And this is the only one that actually knows everything about you. And this is actually the one that you're most vulnerable with. So this is the one that you blow up on the most. And you might be projecting like it's them. But think of it again. If you had 500 people watching, what would you do to stop being hijacked and to get back to the conversation?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, one thing that you taught us that I use sometimes I
easy, sometimes hard.
Is just like you ask, why would and then you insert 5 things,
positive words,
positive affirmations, positive things about that person. So, why would a beautiful, loving, kind, generous, charitable person be acting this way, right? And
this way.
That has, when I implement that slows me down enough that I can kind of put myself in her shoes and
Yeah.
maybe get to what the issue might be.
Yeah.
So
That's a great one. We call that reframing. We call that positive interpreting.
Yep.
So that question forces us to choose positive reasons or healthier reasons instead of the negative reason. Another thing that you would do if you had 500 people watching is you would stop and you'd say, okay, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. And you'd probably clarify more what they're saying. So you'd probably hold that up for them. I would bet, just knowing you guys professionally, you would slow down the conversation. You'd probably watch your tone. You probably wouldn't, neither one of you would send as many jabs back and forth. So again, if people are watching and you're kind of the kind of person that worries about that, you can control it. All we try to do when we work with you is we try to show you what works, like slowing it down. Another example is if I told you that we take your biggest issue that you and Courtney or you or anybody out there with their partner has, what if we told you that if you couldn't solve this issue, we would take your child and you would lose your child forever?
Yeah.
Unless you solve it and solve it for real. So then what would you do? And I guarantee you'd slow down, you'd get clear, you'd be more bendable, you'd be more flexible, you'd give the benefit of the doubt, and you'd probably, it wouldn't have to be my way or the highway. So those are all principles that we find in conflict resolution that work. It's just like you're saying, once you're hijacked by the emotion, then the emotion is driving you, not your values and your principles. Mm-hmm. And by definition, we call that, Jordy, reactivity, right? So reactivity is when your mood, your circumstance, or the situation you're in is driving your response. That's reactive. And our goal is instead to be proactive, which is where we let our principles and our values and our highest sense of self drive this response.
That's awesome. Well, man, there's a lot we could go into. I want to touch real quick, just because it's fresh in my mind and I forget. So way back in the day, we would actually have to come to you.
Yeah.
In a one-on-one situation. And I mean, I'm sure everyone listening can kind of grasp the value that you add in conflict in a marriage, because, like, let's be real, we all have it.
Yeah.
Everyone has had it. Everyone will continue to have it. Like, it's part of life. And one quote that you have, I think it was on like a TED Talk or something like a TED Talk, but you said, we're all spiritual beings who have earthly experience.
Yeah, having a human experience.
Human experience, that's right.
Yeah.
Versus human beings that have the occasional spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
As we think about that, and I think everyone that's listening to this had the choice of, hey, I can listen to music or I can listen to a podcast, and they obviously chose a podcast. Yeah. So they want to improve.
Yeah.
And the thing I love about how you've pivoted your business is, before you could only help people one-on-one.
Yeah.
And it was dictated by your time. And you've found a way to be able to help more people with that time, with your knowledge and expertise. So you, on your website, and we're going to link to it, but it's, just Google Dr. Matt Townsend, matttownsend.com, and you've got some courses available for people.
Yeah. We have a lot of online courses, and then we have 2 programs that we're doing right now. One is called Becoming One, which is, so I have all my classes where you can just go and a la carte buy my Feeding the Starved Marriage class. So if you're in a starved marriage, you can go buy the course and watch it together. It's a 12-hour course, and you can download a workbook. I have one that we're about to release called Real Communication, Real Connection. And it's all about using a model I have called Getting Real, and it's how you cut through the smoke and get down to the fire. And then I have another one that we're about to release called The Emotionally Intelligent Leader. It's actually a program I designed for the Air Force for leadership development, and mainly emotional leadership development. So that's coming out. And then I have another really awesome quick course that's called, the 10-Day Marriage Makeover. And when you go take it, you take a 50-point assessment, and I help you find out how starved you are, and how far down what we call the starved spiral you are. So once you're starved, you start starving each other. And the rule is starved people are starving each other. And as you spiral, you start getting into, because you're so triggered, you start getting into this spiral of negative behaviors. You become what's called selfish, right? You start self-protecting. You become more reactive. You become polarized. You become negative. You become hopeless, like this won't work. And then you start to abandon. So when you go to the 10-day marriage makeover, it's probably one of our least expensive programs. And you just take the assessment, and then we send you 10 videos to teach you tools for each level on how to get out of that level. And then we have this other program that's called Becoming One, which is a subscription site where you go and you have access to all of these classes. We drip them out to you just so you're not overwhelmed. And we do coaching online every week. We do coaching calls where you can bring your questions to me and I answer them, or you can always ask the coach a question. Plus, we are just adding content nonstop to that site. So that's called Becoming One. And then the coolest thing that I think lately we've been doing is what I call the Peacemaker relationship coaching certification, where I certify you to become basically a relationship coach, just like me. You have access to all of my content, and I teach you how to coach people. And so if a lot of HR people, a lot of counselors and therapists are getting certified in it, and we're just training everyone up, but it's all online is the goal, right? So I'm trying to send it out that way. And then I'm still coaching people one-on-one, but I really am loving getting my content out. And the fun thing about it too is it's me getting back to my old roots of production and videos and TV. So it's fun for me because I get to keep doing kind of TV, but I also get to get deep into content. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and, I think, financially, it makes a big difference when you're investing, say, $500 in a course that you can go at your own pace.
Yeah.
If anyone out there ends up doing this course, I'd love your feedback. But Courtney and I, what we do is we had to go in person, meet with you, or, go through the class, and it was thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And that's not available to everyone. Yet
No.
We all have issues, right? We all need this information as we're in this human experience, because let's face it, we all want to improve. If we're not growing, we're dying.
Right.
Most people don't want to be stagnant. And this is one area where I'm sure no one else has this problem. But for me, when things aren't right in my marriage, it's hard to concentrate at work. You can't get anything.
Everything's off.
Everything's wrong. And so, but when things are humming along and everything's good, it's like what you can achieve as a person is magnified. Yeah.
I believe it. And back to that quote. So if we really are spiritual beings, which Emerson, Thoreau, every, major movement from, emancipation to women's suffrage to, Gandhi's work, Mandela's work, it was all driven by this idea that there's a divine spark inside of every human, right? And so if there's a divine spark in every human, then, for example, how could we enslave them? And that one concept that people are spiritual beings is what frees us from some of the tensions of war and conflict and hating each other and combativeness. And so and again, you don't have to be way churchy. You just have to look at people. You just have to look at people that are suffering, and you'll actually feel their suffering. If we would slow down and just pay attention and notice, humans are wired to pick up pain. And so in a really weird way, I believe the number one spiritual practice is not going to church, and it's not reading scripture, and it's not doing those things. The number one spiritual practice are our relationships, because no one bugs you more and no one do you love more. And so when you start to lose yourself in service of the people you love the most is when you actually find yourself. And so that is why it's kind of scary to think of populations of people that won't marry, and or populations of people that won't have kids, because we just don't want them anymore. But I can try all I want to become aware of myself, but the only way I really can test myself is with other people. I need other people to play off of to know myself. So I really think in the end, relationships are the core of our purpose here on this earth, but I also think it's the ultimate test. And I'm not even believing that they all need to be fixed or are fixable, but we all need to at least reach back into our quiver and have enough arrows that we can pull stuff out and shoot better shots than just a reactive blow, right? And so I really feel like if we at the end of our lives could end as a seriously better human being who knows how to relate to other human beings and be more loving, that's probably the best thing we can teach anybody, is how to love.
Yeah, man.
Powerful.
So powerful, so powerful. And it's everything, because you strip out, I'm sure you've coached over 25 years, people on both ends of the spectrum financially, right? Finances are easy.
Billionaires.
Because,
yeah.
And
everyone. From prisoners to billionaires, quite literally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they all have the same problems.
Yeah.
Or similar, they rhyme.
Yeah. By the way, they all have the same 7 needs: safety, trust, appreciation, respect, validation, encouragement, dedication. I don't care if you're in the prison or you're at the country club. Everybody has those needs. And if we're talking about that guy disrespected me by stepping on my ball on the greens, okay, that's a respect issue. Or if you just got shanked in the prison, that's a respect issue. There's just safety and respect issues everywhere you go. That's the human factor, right? That's how humans are.
Yeah. So what would you say the top 3 starved issues in your 25 years of experience have been?
Great question. Yeah.
In marriages?
Well, one that's huge. Most people that go to marriage counseling, for example, the number one thing they're going for is communication. Okay, which is interesting because most therapists I know don't have profound expertise in communication theory. They just don't. So that's one reason I wanted a master's in communication theory and conflict. So communication is the number one thing couples can't do. And then the topics they can't communicate around tend to be, number one, money. And by the way, money's core, right? Because money is tied to power. It's tied to identity. It's tied to safety. And I always joke, so it's that you have too much money. Is that what it is? And it's usually not too much. It's just too little. But again, I have really, really rich people that still can't talk about their money because there's too much tied to it. So money's a big one. Another one lately tend to be like, how do you put it? I have a lot of in-law issues that I'm dealing with where I have like a daughter-in-law fighting with a mother-in-law. And this is actually a pretty fun little rule for everybody out there listening. Whenever you have an in-law issue, whether it doesn't matter if it's father, son, father, daughter-in-law, whatever it is, whenever there's an in-law related issue, there's usually one source of the problem. Or actually there's one solution that we have to work on. And usually the reason that's happening is because the real source that can fix it isn't doing anything. So anytime I have a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law problem, I would bet money the problem is a weak husband, son-in-law, or weak son and a weak husband. So it's basically whoever's the common denominator, whoever's related to the parent and whoever is married to the person, that person has to play a stronger role. So if my mom is fighting with my wife, then I need to put my mom in check and my wife in check. But what happens is that a really weak son doesn't put anyone in check. And now mom and wife are fighting probably to get some validation from this guy, the boy. And so in-laws are a big issue. And then probably the governing number one problem we're facing is what's called attachment issue. Right now, Jordy, about 60% of millennials and about 50% of Gen X, which is me. Am I Gen X? Yeah. Gen Xers, we have attachment issues, which means we don't safely know how to attach to people around us. And it's very simply, whenever I feel starved, my fight or flight turns on, and I then attach to people around me in a really weird way. I either fight to be loved, so I'm real controlling, I'm real demanding, I'm real mean, I'm real needy, or I'm a pleaser, or I flight whenever I'm vulnerable and I run away, or I do both, fight or flight. And that attachment is this conflict pattern that we teach you how to break. And there's some great books out there if anyone wants to read about it. One book is called Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson. And it's an awesome book. And another book that I would recommend people get is called The Confidence Gap by Russ Harris. And his basic premise is every one of us has a gap because of our fear. And that gap is always causing our pain. And we have to eventually address our fear. So we got to figure out what we're afraid of. And then the book is awesome. By the way, don't read The Confidence Gap. Get the book and do every exercise in the book, and it will help you start to break down your fears and start acting on your fears. It's pretty powerful. So those are probably the most common: money, attachment, and in-laws lately.
Okay. Again, just going back to how much experience you have, do you think most relationships could be saved if both parties want to put in the work?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on how they got there. Remember, so if a lot of people have unsafe attachment, then what usually we're doing is every fight we're having is about really our attachment. So the example of starved, most people come to the marriage not being fed and then they're starved. Most people come with some eating disorders, right? We just never learned to be fed and we never learned how to do it. So an example, I have a great client that's really successful, has a tech company that's booming. Probably the guy's probably worth $100 million, but he doesn't feel in his marriage and family that he's lovable. He doesn't feel capable. He doesn't feel like he belongs. He doesn't feel safe. So every time those feelings come up and it makes him vulnerable, what he does as a dad is he doesn't step in like he does the boss of his company and fix stuff. He just kind of withdraws and pulls away. So we were talking this, and the successful guy's telling me this, and I'm like, what's your earliest memory that you have of feeling unlovable and not feeling like you're capable and not belonging and you don't fit in and you're not safe? And he got really emotional and he said, I was 15 years old and I didn't make the baseball team. And that's what you felt? And by the way, he's like, yeah. And he says, it feels exactly the way this feels right now. So what did you do at 15? So at 15, Jordy, he didn't mature up as a 50-year-old business person. He would slink away and he withdrew and he hid because he didn't make the team. He was better than guys that did, but his family wasn't rich. So he'd have to do a fundraiser to get his fees. And they didn't really want to do fundraisers. So they booted him. So what he did is he withdrew. So he fled and then he hid and he never hung out with those friends again. And at 15, he created a script for how he's going to handle his feeling of lack of and being vulnerable and lack of love. And he learned it back then. And then the next year in high school, he quit high school at 17, took the GED, passed it in a second, and then went to college and graduated in 2 years with a degree in coding and built an empire. And every single time in the family he didn't fit in, he would withdraw and go work on his company. And he's compensating. And so you'll see it in business. A lot of the guys that are really successful aren't successful at home and they're compensating. And or everybody out there that you see has bigger muscles than they really need might be compensating. Or if you've got more education than you need, I'm compensating. I didn't need 2 masters and a doctorate, but I grew up in a family where Not one man in my entire history in my family had gotten a degree. So I got one. And I married into a family with really smart Harvard and Duke and Johns Hopkins trained doctors and top of class. So I had to compensate. So we are all compensating. And so that's a pretty interesting example when you think we don't even know what we're fighting about really, but I'm still battling, or this woman was battling her husband's 15-year-old boy, not even his 50-year-old executive. And so that's how these kind of get complicated. So if you're out there listening and you think, yeah, this is my life, I have that, go get the book, Hold Me Tight, and start reading it and start seeing what part of it is your past. And let's start talking more openly about that. And you'll see that that starts to put the fire out. And then we don't have to fight about something as silly as a purse, right? Or golfing.
And I love that, just going back to when I quoted you on, we're spiritual beings having a earthly experience.
Yeah, by the way, that is Teilhard de Chardin said that. He was a Catholic monk, I think, or a Catholic priest. Yeah.
Okay. There's nothing new under the sun.
No, that's right. No, there is nothing new.
But like, this is kind of the purpose and the reason beyond everything else that, in my opinion, I'm going to throw out my opinion here, that we're here on this planet. Like, I think God kind of designed it to give us the experience and the ability, once we kind of get past the, getting eaten by a bear or a cougar or saber-toothed tiger, like going back and figuring out this kind of stuff, figuring out how you can show up as a more mature being in, a bunch of different areas in life, I think is the purpose. And, the irony is you can never master it.
No, well, because the more you know you don't know, right? That's a paradigm shift we ought to make. That life is not to master. I mean, the only way you could master something is you would have to master something in such a finite way that you're now the master of something that's finite, like that's really narrow and small. So mastery takes place only in the smallest of realms. And you'll see people that dedicate everything to the mastery of tennis or their art generally have neglected everything else around them. And, that's why a lot of them go crazy, or that's why a lot of them, they're just not balanced. And so part of the idea, can you make any marriage work? You can always make marriages better and improve. What I believe is that they all shouldn't be saved necessarily, but you don't want to end them when you're severely broken. So you got to get healthy first. And then once you're healthy, you use your health to make the decisions about if we stay together. Some of the best relationships I've ever seen were relationships that loved each other enough to let each other go. And what they could see in each other is our differences aren't what we both want. So I'm going to let you go instead of hammering you down the rest of your life. I'm going to love you enough to let you go, but I'm not going to cheat on you, and I'm not going to hate you, and I just don't want what you want anymore. So I think the ones that maybe shouldn't work are the ones that are really unhealthy. The research is really clear. Unless you have severe conflict, arguing and fighting consistently going on, in almost every other way, you're better to stay together, especially if you have kids. So unless there's incessant fighting, your life will be better figuring this stuff out. There's other research that shows if you do nothing to fix your marriage, but just give it 5 years, everything changes in time. So things that are tipping you over now with a new baby at home and all these things, they'll kind of get better as time goes on. But we have a lot of people right now that would rather, I think, have an experience than have a relationship. There's some really interesting research showing that we have a generation of people now being raised with their phones that are probably better at recognizing the best emoji to use than a real facial expression on someone's face.
Wow.
Which is kind of terrifying, right? And so, and I'm not a doomsdayer that just scares people. I don't want to scare anybody, but we've got to learn to get this relationship stuff right, because we already have an AI coming. We already have cars that'll drive us. We already have all these things that'll make life easier, which gives us more time to relate. But if we don't know how to relate, then we're escaping. And there's a great quote that says, whatever you're escaping from imprisons you.
Ooh.
And so even though we might be more and more free to just go escape, if you're escaping, you're really less free. You're more in prison.
Wow.
Terrifying, huh?
Yeah, terrifying. And well, but it's also, if you have that knowledge and you can use it, appropriately.
Yeah. Change.
It can set you free, right?
Right. That's right. And lift everything.
Yeah.
And just lift your own character. That's the big thing we teach in our program is you can't have a relationship at a higher level than you have the character to possess. Right? So if you're highly reactive, you can't have a better conversation. So you've got to learn to manage your reactivity. And so what we teach is grow your character. And when you grow your character, then you'll see that your communication starts to grow with it. And when you can communicate well, then what you'll see, you can be a better companion because now I understand you. And when we understand each other and you're a better companion, life is better. But what we try to do is, I guess, grow companionship first, communication first, but we never focus on the character. The character is the only thing it's the leading factor to success. Character is your ability to hear something you don't like, take a big deep breath and take one more step in to understand it more and listen. And then that helps you communicate and that helps you be a better partner.
Man, and if everyone could just implement that, especially our politicians.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just think that so much could be better. And
oh, yeah.
we wouldn't be fighting over whose lives matter and whose don't.
That's right.
And,
we'd all be just taking care of each other.
Yeah.
And we'd dare say what needs to be said, and we'd actually be able to hear people saying it because we wouldn't react. And it's, again, like the funny thing about it is we are the people, right? Like, so we're the ones that have to not vote for the people with no character. And but what we all say is, well, yeah, nobody has character, so I'm just going to vote for the people that have my ideas. But what you're going to find out is when they supposedly have your ideas, they really don't. If they don't have character, they don't have your ideas unless your ideas are not in character. So you can't win chasing a horse with no character. You're going to eventually put it down. There's a great quote about we tend to hire people based on their competency, and we almost always fire them based on their character. What might be smarter is to hire them for character and then train for competency. It's 10 times easier to train competency than training character. We ought to marry for character and train in competency and get them more competent. Yeah. And then instead we want the hot one with abs, and then we got it. Oh, he's ripped. And then the guy has no character. Or some have abs and they have character. That's how they got the abs. But when it comes down to it, it's always going to be character, communication, companionship, and change. Those are the 4, what we call courses of my Feeding the Starved Marriage. Character, communication, companionship, change.
Awesome. So if someone wanted to work on their character, what course would you recommend? Or
I'd recommend right now, I'd go to matttownsend.com and I would probably either get into the Feeding the Starved Marriage workshop, which is kind of a 12-hour workshop. I think that's one that you've seen. That's a 12-hour workshop. Another one that I would probably get into is the 10-day marriage makeover, because that'll immediately tell you what behaviors we need to change. And that's a really quick program you can get through. Or I'd go to matttownsend.com and get in our Becoming One program, which is it's $60 a month, but you get access to thousands of dollars of classes. And I do coaching every week, and you can get in those calls, and I'll just talk to you about your issues, or you can just submit them and I'll answer those issues.
I love that. That's $60 a month you're Feeding the Starved Marriage is $5.99.
That's a date. It's basically a date And then you guys could sit at home and watch that and take the classes and start learning together. And if you just imagine you did that for 5 years, for 5 years, every week you worked on your marriage, you're going to live the rest of your life a pretty awesome relationship.
Yeah.
That's
And
cool.
I
That's
think
the
that's
goal.
all what we're going after. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's awesome. $60 a month.
That ain't bad.
Yeah. That's
And you can cancel anytime. That's what's cool too, right? And then we have people that'll do it for a while, then cancel, and just because they've got to go, they're going to be out of town and they're not going to have time. Then they come back and they start back up for the fall, and it's awesome. And then every couple months we release a brand new date night. Every week I release what's called a deeper cut, which is another 30 minutes of content that I've created every week. That's just rich content. I have literally 1,300 hours of podcast shows from my TV and radio days that we're trying to post up and get up there. So you will have more content than you ever need.
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll just say this, I mean, in a society where you have less than a 50% success rate in marriages, man, it's needed now more than ever. So
That's right. Yeah, it's
thank
so
you.
true. And it is, and it's just know there's hope. Like there's hope. You're not, a lot of us just have never learned any of this. And so you don't even need a ton of skills. You just need a few. And that just a few immediately stops the bleeding.
Mhm.
And then we can really start the feeding.
Yeah, that's great. Love it. Well, I want to be sensitive to your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Jordy. You bet.
Is there anything else you want to share with?
No, just become the change, right? So if you've been listening today and you're thinking, yeah, my wife really needs to hear this. What you might want to do is don't think that way, but just think, what do I need to do because of what we heard? What's the one thing, what's the most important thing you can do right now based on what you've heard to go create a positive change in your marriage? Maybe it's to just go love your partner more. Maybe it's to go apologize. Maybe it's to exercise more character. Maybe it's to get down to the starved issues, or maybe it's to get a workshop or a class. But I just challenge you to do one thing as you walk away, because the minute you act, you feel better. You feel better. And things tend to get better when we act on the right thing, right? And so I just challenge you to go do something, whatever that one thing is.
Awesome. Love it. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jordy. You're the best.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Financially Free Investor. If you found value in this episode or know someone who would find value in this information, please share with them, subscribe, and send us a review.